Good morning. Today is August 23rd, 2006. My name is Jack Cooney. Today I'm conducting an oral history interview with David Ellis. This interview is being held at the Dalton Community Television Studio in Dalton, Massachusetts, in association with the Dalton Council on Aging. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
Please state your name and address for the record and your dates of service.
I'm David R. Ellis. Presently, I'm a pastor of a church in the area of Quakertown, Pennsylvania. I live at 3414 County Line Road in the village of Spinnerstown, but we get our mail from Quakertown, so that's how we get that on there. I began my military service in March of 1982 in the Army Reserve and finished my military service last year in 2005 on the 1st of July.
Okay, David. Now, I know a little bit about you. You grew up in Dalton.
Yeah, you ought to.
So you grew up here in Dalton. I know your mother and father quite well. And I just want to take you back a little bit to your school days here. You graduated, well, let me see, you were born on September 5th.
Right.
1953.
That's right.
And in fact, you're going to have a birthday here in
that's what they tell me.
In a few days. So that's special. And you graduated from Wacona Regional High School,
Yes.
1971. My son Dan was a classmate of yours.
Yes, I remember him well.
And so from 71, you went to college. You started your career.
I began at Berkshire Community College on the old campus, the old Pittsfield High School. I started there. Finished at BCC and then went to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst.
Okay.
And then after that, for 2 years, I attended Andover Newton Theological School and then transferred to Gordon Conwell Theological School. These are schools in the Boston area. Okay. And I graduated with a Master Divinity degree from Gordon Conwell in 1980.
1980. So now you're a clergyman, and you got to get a job. I would think.
That's right.
So how does that? What happens after that? You're now have a degree, and you're a clergy, and you need to get a church.
In my denomination, which is the United Church of Christ, it actually doesn't work all that much differently from opening up the newspapers and looking for a want ad in your particular profession. Okay. We actually have a booklet which lists which church has an opening in it, and we apply to interview with that congregation. In our system, the local congregation chooses the pastor for their church.
Okay. So then, how did you get connected with the Army and the Army Reserve? How did that get started?
Well, somebody up in recruiting command probably will like to hear this story, but it really is true. One night, my wife and I were watching television. It was a Friday night, and this is back in the day when the recruiting theme for the Army was "Be All That You Can Be," and there was a group of soldiers double timing down the road. And it was strange because during that time when that ad was on television, my wife and I were talking about, well, what will we be doing in the next 10 or 15 years? Where will we be going? What will be happening? And she turned to me and she said, excuse me, would you consider going into the Army? And I kind of laughed about that because, quite frankly, not knowing what the recruiting requirements were, I said, I think I'm too old. I was 27, so I figured that's way over what they're looking for. And she said, not even as a chaplain? Well, that notion just stuck in my head.
Yeah.
And a week or so later, I had to be downtown in the city of Worcester, which is where I was living at the time. And I went in and I talked to the recruiter and fully expected the man to say, oh, you're too old. Well, what he did was he turned me over to an Army chaplain at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, which at the time was an active duty post. I interviewed with this man and began the paperwork process. And in March of 1982, I was commissioned as a chaplain, first lieutenant, in the Army Reserve at Fort Devens, Massachusetts.
Okay. So tell me about this. This is not active duty, this is reserve duty.
That's right, yes.
And tell me the difference there. As far as active duty, I know that you get a uniform and you go right in, basic training and all that, but reserve. Explain that a little bit.
Well, the way it was at the time when I went in, and we have to remember that this is almost, 25 years ago.
Okay.
So things may have changed. But how it worked with me was I was assigned to a unit. It happened to be an infantry unit, an outfit that no longer exists. And I served with them. I got my uniforms and my equipment. I served with them, and a year later, I went to basic training at it's now Fort Jackson, South Carolina is where the chaplain school is, but in those days it was at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And I went there for 6 weeks, completed basic training, and then returned to service with my unit. Basically that was 1 weekend a month and then 2 weeks a year of annual training at a military installation. Could be Fort Devens, could be someplace else.
Okay.
But that's basically how it worked.
How it got started, okay. So then, when you were in the reserve, what were you doing? You were at a church someplace?
I was serving as pastor in Oakham, Massachusetts, to begin with. Then I took another church in addition, so I had two congregations. The next was in West Brookfield, Massachusetts. And during that time, what would happen, my wife also is an ordained minister, so what was happening was, in agreement among the churches and the Ellises, she would cover for me on drill weekends, and I would be able to spend the drill out in the woods with my soldiers, which really helped as far as establishing relationships there.
Okay. And you're still a second lieutenant? No, you're a first lieutenant at this point.
No, I am a lieutenant. My rank is I am a lieutenant colonel.
Now you aren't.
I am in what's called the retired reserves. I'm no longer serving with a unit, but my commission is still intact.
Okay. Now that this Iraq War starts, you're in the reserves, and you're a lieutenant colonel.
Yes.
In the reserves.
Yes.
You get the call to be active.
January 16th, 2:30 in the afternoon. I can tell you what the weather was. I remember vividly. It was one of the few times when I turned the volume down on my answering machine in my office, and I'm glad I did, because once I'd heard my commander's voice, all he said was, said who he was, and that I was to call him as soon as possible. If I had heard that, then the people that I was talking to, I would have lost any ability to listen to what they were saying. Okay. So I picked that message up after they left.
Okay. So now you know you're going to be active.
Right.
And then what happened?
Well, initially we met at the Reserve Center for a few days. There was paperwork that they wanted to do on us before we headed to our mobilization site, which was Fort Dix, New Jersey. We got to Fort Dix. We were at Fort Dix for 2 months. Oh. We were picked up in January. We went to Fort Dix, I think it was around the 20th or the 21st of January in 2003. We were there until March 21st of 2003. There was training we had to go through, certification that we were actually able to be mobilized, that we could actually go to wherever we were going and perform our job. Making sure that we got all the equipment that we needed, all of the vaccinations, all of our medical records, wills, powers of attorney taken care of. Then we went through some additional training. It was kind of ironic. We were training for desert warfare, and it was the coldest winter on record at Fort Dix, New Jersey. It was freezing cold, and we were pretty much walking around in heavy snow. Looking forward to a warmer climate.
And how many weeks was that? You said 2 months.
It was 2 months.
2 months.
2 months at Fort Dix, yes.
Okay. In the cold.
In the cold.
Okay. So after 2 months, then a new assignment. You were assigned to a military police.
Military police battalion. Yes.
Okay.
We received word that the plane was coming in. Part of the difficulty of this waiting process is that there would be times when it looked like we were going, when we would be told, get your stuff together.
Today's the day.
Tomorrow morning, we're on the plane. And then something would happen that the plane didn't show up. The tension there, obviously, it's the up and down. It's a roller coaster kind of a thing.
Not
And
good.
it's tough. It's tough. I know you're a veteran too, and you probably can appreciate the value of what that's like.
That's
finally there came a day when they announced, we've got the numbers on the tail, meaning we actually know the aircraft. This is the real thing. We are packing up and we are going.
Okay.
And we flew out of McGuire Air Force Base, which is right next door to Fort Dix, and we flew first to Europe, stopped to refuel, and then went on to Kuwait.
When you went to Europe, where did you stop? Like in Shannon in Ireland?
We stopped,
Maybe in England.
initially I believe we stopped in Italy.
Stopped in Italy.
I think we stopped in Italy first. We were there for a few hours. We didn't leave the plane, and then we flew on into Kuwait.
Into Kuwait. Then what happened in Kuwait?
Well, when the plane landed, somebody's wisdom, I don't know whose, decided that our chemical suits, and at that point in time, it's important to remember that all of us were being told, prepare for chemical warfare. Prepare for the fact that Saddam Hussein is going to use chemical weapons on us.
Yes.
So we all had a uniform, which we carried in a sack, plus our gas masks. Well, for some reason, don't know why, our chemical suits were all in one particular place. We didn't have them, but when we got off the plane, we had our protective masks, our gas masks, and noticed that every single soldier that we saw, other than us, was in full chemical gear, except that they were not wearing their masks. It did not make us feel comfortable.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think so.
Now, I didn't quite like that. I thought, gee, with this situation, we might as well have left the masks. It'd be one thing less that we'd have to carry.
Mercy. Wow. So, how long did you stay there?
We were in Kuwait for 10 days, and that was still at the point when the Iraqis had mobile Scud missile launchers, which we were getting Scud attacks, Scud alerts, I should say, anywhere from 1 to 3 times a day. Usually they would shoot at us at least once at night. These are, I don't know missiles very well, but these missiles can do quite a bit of damage to what they hit. And again, I slept for those 10 days. I slept in my chemical suit and just kept my protective mask either right down here at the bottom of my cot,
close by,
or somewhere near my head. So all I had to do was grab it and put the mask on.
Were you in tents or were you in the buildings?
The place where we were in Kuwait had, I don't know what they were used for, I don't know what the Kuwaiti government used them for, but enormous warehouses. And basically what they did was they put us in the warehouses. Now eventually, as the buildup continued to occur, they put up tents in the area behind where we were in a hard facility. You know, it had basically like a tin roof over it and brick walls. It looked like an enormous garage.
Wow.
But would it have provided protection against nerve agent maybe for a little bit longer than standing outside in it, but it was not an airtight facility, and so we had to make sure that we were very efficient in getting them on. Yeah. And adrenaline's a marvelous thing. It will enable you to move a lot faster than you would normally think you could.
Okay. How many troops were there? That must have been packed with soldiers at that time.
I would not really be able to estimate how many there. I'm going to guess there were thousands, and I don't really know. I mean, there were soldiers everywhere.
Okay, that's what I thought, yeah. The Kuwaiti people, were you able to mingle with any of them?
No. The Kuwaiti people themselves, as far as I knew, I never saw any Kuwaiti people, Kuwaiti citizens, working on the base. Now, there were third country nationals who would come into Kuwait and work for the Kuwaitis at various jobs, and there were some of those folks who were there, and there were also individuals, people that had been hired by the U.S. government contractors from other countries as well, who would come in and provide certain services for us.
So you were there 10 days. What was the time Give me some idea what the time of that was. That was in 203.
This is 203. If my memory serves me well, I think the ground war started somewhere on the 19th. It was in that vicinity.
It was in March, wasn't it?
March. I think the
around
ground
St.
war.
Patrick's Day. Is that
Yeah. Well, you would know better in memory about that than I,
that's
Jack.
what I remember.
But yeah, it was right around St. Patrick's Day. We were there from the. I'm gonna again. I didn't have a calendar and I wasn't really paying much attention to the dates, but it was probably around the 22nd or the 23rd of March. And then at the end of March and the very beginning of April, we left. I think that somebody said that the Scud attacks stopped the day we left.
Okay.
So I guess they really must have been concerned that we were there, and once we left, they stopped shooting.
They knew you were coming.
I guess they did.
Okay. So then you started to march towards Baghdad, I guess.
Actually, we didn't go immediately to Baghdad. We stopped. We got up to the Kuwaiti border. We had some ancient Mercedes-Benz dump trucks, some very elderly buses that were rented, leased, bought from the Kuwaiti government. That was our transportation. At that point in time, we did not have a lot of our own vehicles. We were only able to ship over so many vehicles. We were supposed to be receiving vehicles once we got to our site. So most of us did not travel in military vehicles. We looked kind of like a motley crew in terms of our vehicles. But we got to the Kuwait-Iraq border and there was a big hand-painted sign that said flak jackets and helmets will be worn beyond this point. And that's when we knew this is really it.
That's a good signal that you were on your way.
Right. And I remember as we crossed the border, and this to me is one of those memories that will stick in my mind until I die. We were just sort of looking out the windows of the buses. The buses were curtained to help keep the heat out, and I'll tell you, they were very effective. There was no air conditioning on the bus. And it was getting rather hot, but these curtains really did help keep the temperature cooler than what it was outside. Of course, understanding outside, it was well over 100 degrees at that point.
In March.
But yes,
in March.
right. But it was still cooler inside the bus. But I remember we looked at. I will distinctly remember as we were riding up the road, and we were now in Iraq, in southern Iraq. I think the question in all of our minds was going to be certainly. Is somebody going to be shooting at us soon? But I think a lot of us were wondering, in a broader sense, what kind of reception are we going to be getting? And we got to a point where, and there was nothing, it was desert, it was flat. But there was a small mud brick house, and we could barely see an adult and what appeared to be 3 small children standing next to the grown-up. And as we got closer, these were the first Iraqi people that we would see.
Yeah.
And I'll never, as long as I live, I will never forget that once it was a man. It was the father of these 3 little children dressed in traditional Arab clothing. He saw our convoy. He recognized that there were several U.S. Army vehicles in the convoy, and he started to dance.
Dance.
He danced. He threw up his arms and he started twisting around. And yet, if you've ever watched a ballet dancer, they hold their head in a particular position so that they don't get dizzy.
Yeah.
He had a smile on his face. He glowed. He was thrilled to see us. We were astonished at this. Mm-hmm. And his 3 little children were yelling and jumping up and down and waving at us.
So that was a good beginning.
That was a shock.
Yeah.
We didn't know what to expect. I experienced that type of a positive response. Not necessarily everybody danced every time they saw us. I don't mean that. But I think a lot of people are not aware of the number of times that U.S. forces have received positive responses from the local people. Mm-hmm. The bottom line, and it's so commonsensical it almost feels ridiculous to say it, but we found that this worked for us. if you try to understand the customs of the people with whom you work, if you show them respect, and if you make an effort in good faith to cooperate with them and work with them towards a common goal, you don't have to worry about getting shot at. When you have gained the trust of those people, they will not harm you.
Mm-hmm.
One memory, and I can't remember this general's name, but when we went to Toledo, where we were to run what was at that time called the Corps Holding Facility. In that facility, prior to our arrival, was an Iraqi Air Force general who had commanded the Air Force base at Toledo. He had sent all of his military personnel and their families home. He said, when he found out the war started, he said, "Go away and do not come back." He waited for the Americans to come. There was very little battle damage. I didn't actually see any sign of any battle damage on that military installation, which surprised me quite a bit.
I would think it would.
The Marines fought a very, very tough battle in the city of Nasiriyah, which was nearby. Very, very hard combat.
The Marines went first.
The Marines were in. That was the area that the Marines were responsible for. They took that city. They took that area after some incredibly hard fighting. This Iraqi general was initially captured by the Marines, and when he was being interrogated, one of them said to him, "Why is it that we came on this post and there was no fire?" They asked him, first of all, too, why he didn't run away.
Yeah.
He said, "I am the captain of my ship, and the captain stays with the ship." I think he gained the respect of those people for saying that, because he certainly didn't know what was going to happen to him. But he shared something with those soldiers that was passed on to me, which left a definite impression at that point in time about how we were to understand ourselves and our function in that country. This man, in his early career, he was a general, I don't know of what rank at that point in time. At that point in time, he shared with his interrogators that when he was a young officer, he had read a story about something that American soldiers had done during the Korean War, and it never left him. Apparently, there was a situation in which American soldiers inadvertently caused damage, I think, to some kind of an electrical pole or a light pole or something. And in the account that was in the textbook he was studying, it mentioned the fact that they got out of their vehicle, obviously they weren't under fire, and repaired it.
Fixed it.
They fixed it.
Yeah.
This astonished him.
Didn't have to do that. Oh.
And he said to us, now this was at the point when we were still fighting the Iraqi army, Saddam Hussein was still in charge of the government. This man said to the Americans, he said, "You Americans will not win this war because you are the greatest nation on earth and have the largest army and the most powerful weapons." He said, "You will win this war," and this was the way he worded this, struck me as very important, "because you win the hearts and minds of the people." His assumption about us is that that's what we would do. We would come in to gain the respect, trust, and friendship of his fellow citizens. That's why he didn't fight us. I never forgot those words.
Wow.
And I said, that man, my enemy, has been a source of inspiration for how, if we conduct our war from that perspective, he'll be right. The jury's still out on it yet.
Yeah, it is still out on it.
But
that's a great
but he was
philosophy,
right.
Yeah.
And I never forgot that.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, doesn't it? Huh?
It does to me.
Yeah. Wow. So, tell me where you're at now as far as moving towards Baghdad.
We were in Toledo running what the CHA, the Corps Holding Area, became changed over in a few days. We always kind of grumbled about the acronyms, but in this case it was a difference in our function. Corps Holding Area was basically a large prison camp.
Right.
Our function changed. Very shortly after we arrived, we became what was a brand new concept in the Army, a transshipment point. The Army had never done this. This was an area in which all kinds of people might be brought to decide, okay, who are these folks? We might have foreign fighters. They were called the Mujahideen. These would be people from other countries who had heard Saddam's call, come and defend your brothers and sisters against these monsters, the Americans. And many of them came, I have to respect this on some level, out of a desire to do good in protecting people who they thought were innocent people from the evil Americans. So there were a number of people, and there are still individuals fighting over there against us. Obviously, at this date and time, the war is still going on.
Yeah.
But we had foreign fighters. We had regular Iraqi army soldiers and their officers. We had people who were part of what was called the Fedayeen Saddam. These are sort of the real diehards, like in Germany during World War II. These would be the people who've been in like the SS.
They were special.
These were just very fanatically dedicated adherents of Saddam Hussein's regime.
Right.
So we had all of those folks. We had folks who were just plain innocent civilians who, because of all kinds of circumstances, found themselves in a crossfire or in a situation where the Americans weren't really sure who the good guys and the bad guys were, so they would send all of these people to this point. So we had different groupings of all of these different folks.
What a chore to separate.
It was a very interesting, to put it mildly, situation, because we had, to use an old movie title, we had the good, the bad, and the ugly.
So the bad and the ugly, you try to...
we would send those folks one place or another.
And the good ones would go back into life.
Right. We had an imam. That's the Muslim counterpart of someone like myself, and he was from Baghdad. And I remember coming into the compound, and one of the guards said, "There's somebody you ought to talk to." And here was this man who was clearly, I could tell by his dress, was a Muslim clergyman. And I went over and I talked with him. And I arranged to bring him a Quran. I noticed that he had no shoes. What had happened to this man is very interesting. Saddam had very little use for the clergy, regardless of their faith. He needed them the way Stalin needed the Russian Orthodox Church in World War II. If these folks can be useful props in helping me to forward my agenda, I'll use them that way. But if they stand up for their principles against me, they're done.
Don't need them.
This man, what was done basically was, he was set up by Saddam Hussein's people. They went to the Americans and said, this imam is a dangerous man. His mosque is a weapons depot. The minaret, which to us would be a bit like the steeple, where the call to prayer is given, is being used as a sniper's nest. He preaches violent hatred against the United States. You better go and pick him up. So what happened was, when I say our, I don't mean my unit, but our forces, U.S. military forces, went down and arrested this man. And they roughed him up, according to what he shared with me.
Could he speak English, or could you speak?
Well,
how did that
it was very interesting. The way it was put to me was that he spoke very little English, which I believe was true. But I think he had some understanding. What I didn't know at the time, his 3 young sons were with him, and they spoke English. And as I would talk to the translators, every once in a while one of the boys would lean over and whisper to his father. My impression was he was telling Dad, here's what that man with the cross on his hat is saying right now. What was very emotional for me was that as time went on, this man who initially was very afraid of me and suspicious of my intentions began to realize that I was not there to harm him. He was an innocent civilian. I was able to ascertain with the invaluable help of 2 counterintelligence people that this man had been set up. The evidence was coming out. They were talking to me. They said, this guy should not be sent to a prisoner of war camp. He should be released. I was able, in part because of my status and my rank, to make some phone calls and make some contact with individuals and say, we got a guy here who really shouldn't be here. And we're able to get him released. We also were able to find out that 4 of his parishioners, to use a Christian term, were also in the camp. We brought them in. It was a very emotional moment. We watched these men embracing, crying. And finally, I talked with them, and they were informed of the fact that they would be released. One man came over to me on he was not the imam, but another man literally came to me on his hands and knees. I've never experienced anything like this. Took my hand and kissed it. There were tears streaming down his face. I've never had an experience like that with anyone. And I asked one of the translators, I said, what happened? I said, this man came over, he was crying, he took my hand, he kissed my hand. I said, I don't understand. He kept saying, shukran, 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 which in Arabic means thank you.
Thank you. He was just so grateful.
I did not know that what the translator had said to them all was the chaplain, meaning me, is responsible for the fact that you will be given your freedom today. The imam, who, as I said, had been roughed up, had been badly treated, the American soldiers who captured him were in the midst of a firefight. I don't excuse that kind of behavior, but I think in a combat environment, when you think you've captured the enemy, someone who is hate-filled, there's going to be more of a temptation not to treat that person the way they should be treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention.
Yes.
And he had shared the details of that with me. And I had, like I said, I had brought him a Quran that he could use. He sat me down at one point, actually, and there was English on one side of the Quran, Arabic on the other. He read the Quran to me, but had me read the English. And he was trying to show me the things that Muslims and Christians had in common belief, certain things that they held in common. I was fascinated because that gesture said, this was almost a way of him trying to say to me, we have some things in common. I don't believe you are the enemy. When I received word that the imam and his 3 sons and these 4 other Iraqi men were going to be freed, I stood up. It was a very emotional moment. The imam came over to me and took my arms and looked up at me with the most piercing gaze, and he said in English, I believe that God meant for us to meet this day.
Something, huh?
And I looked back at him, and I kind of choked on my words. I said, yes, sir, I believe God meant for us to meet this day too.
What a great story.
Then he kissed me on both cheeks. He had a full beard. I've never been kissed by a man with a full beard before. I wasn't quite sure what to make of that until the counterintelligence man, who was also an American soldier and a Muslim, said to me, yes, that's another surprise. People, I noticed you got a surprised look on your face when I said that. There are a lot of Muslim men and women serving in our military and serving very honorably, and it is a tragedy that their honorable service is not discussed. And if that mention helps, I want that to be brought out. Right. But he said to me, the imam has paid you a great honor. He said this is a great honor by him taking you in his arms and kissing you on both cheeks. I wished I could have seen that man again to talk to. And I still think about him every day, and I pray that he's alive. I did find out after the fact that he was someone who very much opposed violence, and when there were situations, this came to me through the grapevine, that this man was one who, whenever an inflammatory situation would arise in his area, he would try to tell people that revenge was not the way. He was a force, and if he is still alive, I believe he is still a force for calm and for good in the place where he lives. What an
experience that is.
It was an unbelievable experience. Wow. It really was. I had many emotional experiences over there, and that was one of them.
That was one of them. Tell us another 1 or 2 experiences you had.
How much time have you
got? We need to know a couple more experiences.
Immediately before meeting the imam, a guard came to me and very quietly said, "Chaplain, we've got a young boy in here who wants us to shoot him." I looked at the guard and I said, "What?" He said, "Chaplain, he wants to die." I said, "Why does he want to die?" And the guard said that what had happened was that this boy lived on a farm. It was very often the case, and I've seen this, that what would happen is Saddam and his people would take a mosque, a school, a neighborhood, and put a large either rocket positions in there, an ammunition dump, so that, well, the propaganda value is this. It's a win-win situation. If the Americans say, "No, that's a civilian area, we will not fire into it," then we've got our ammunition and our weapons and they're safe. If the Americans fire into that area after we've fired at them and they kill civilians, we have a propaganda victory. The brutal Americans attacking innocent men, women, and children. Yeah. Well, that's what happened with this. He was a teenage boy, and it's tragic. A bomb was dropped in the vicinity of their house, and he watched his brothers, his baby sister get killed. The infant took the shrapnel that would have killed the mother. She was wounded, but she was alive. And someone, as he was being taken away, and I don't know by whom, I don't know the details of what that meant, but this neighbor lady said, "We will take your mother to the hospital." In Islamic countries, it's very important that when death occurs, that, if I recall correctly, within 24 hours of the death, the bodies need to be buried, and it is the oldest son's responsibility to take care of that. Well, here he was, in our custody, not knowing about whether his mother was alive, knowing that his brothers and his sister were dead. And even though he was a young boy, he was the eldest. He was responsible for seeing to the burial and the care of his mother. And he was in such anguish that he wanted to die. I remember walking out when I was being told this story and feeling very overwhelmed by it. And I remember praying. I said, "God, what can I possibly say to this young boy that can possibly bring any comfort to him? I don't care what another person's religion is." Jesus was very clear. He didn't care if you were a Samaritan, a Roman, or a Jew, an observant or a non-observant Jew. He ministered where there was a need, and I felt that that's the attitude I had to take with me. I went out, and I had them bring this boy out, and he, of course, he sees me with all of, the helmet and all of the regalia that go with combat. And he was afraid, and I told the translator, "Please tell him I am here only because I am concerned for him. I'm sorrowful for the loss he's faced, and that no harm will come to him." And I just simply asked the translator to translate, and I said, "Please, to this boy, tell me what has happened." And he started to tell the story. Mm-hmm. And as I started listening to this, and the tears are streaming down his face, and he's sobbing, and I became overcome with the story myself. I started to cry too. And at that point, half of my brain is saying, this probably doesn't look much in accordance with military protocol. But I just leaned over and I put my arms around him and I hugged him. And we cried together. Yeah. And eventually he said to the translator, he said,
I needed that from the...
Well, no, what he said to him, which was in a way rather funny, he says, "Please tell him to stop crying. He reminds me of my father." And I talked with that boy, and I could tell after a while that he felt more at peace by the mere fact that I talked with him and I listened to him. The next day, by coincidence, some would say, I happened to be going through the compound when the bus came to pick him up, and he was standing in the line, and he looked over, and he saw me, and he ran out of the line and took my hand and kissed it.
He changed his mind about dying, too. He changed his mind.
I feel
Absolutely.
that I made a difference there,
Absolutely.
that God used me to make a difference there.
Great story.
I really did feel
It's
that.
a great story.
Those were things that happened in Toledo. As time went on, we had forces from other nations there. We had the Dutch, the Italians, the South Koreans, the Ukrainians. I'll tell you a funny story about the Ukrainians. Some of us who were coming through the army in the Cold War days when the Warsaw Pact and the Russians were our enemies. I remember seeing, walking down this road and seeing a BTR, which is an abbreviation. It's a type of a Russian armored personnel carrier, a BTR-70. It had tires, it didn't have treads, rolling toward me with a soldier dressed in the type of military that you would see the Warsaw Pact nations were carrying an AK-74, a newer model of the weapon that the Iraqis were shooting at us. And I remember I gulped, and then I remembered, wait a minute, these folks are on our side now. We were taught to identify those vehicles as enemy vehicles. But we had all of those people. We had 29 different countries serving with us there, which some of which you probably would never even know about. The Albanians sent 12 soldiers. The poorest country in Europe, they still sent to us.
12 soldiers.
12 soldiers. But they did.
They're part of the coalition.
The Mongolians were there,
Wow.
the Poles, the Spanish, the Italians, the South Koreans. Around us, we had the Italians, the South Koreans, and the Dutch. And one of the tragedies that happened in the city of Nasiriyah, near where we were, was that there were 2 truck bombs that destroyed the Italian garrison that was downtown. We had Italians garrisoned across the road for us, and many of us who were chaplains in the U.S. military immediately just went over to the Italian, the Italian cantonment, and just did what we could to talk to them and let them know how sorry we were for the loss. I saw the building. I also saw via photograph some of the human carnage, which I'm not going to describe to you, but was just it was a horrible, horrible thing, and for reasons I'm sure that you could understand, the Italian flag flew at half staff for several days after that, and these soldiers were in deep mourning for the incredible casualties. The ironic thing, something that probably never made the news, the day following that bombing, there were many people, hundreds of people, gathered in the streets to march. They all wore black armbands, and they did this.
These are Iraqi people.
These are Iraqi people.
Yeah.
They did this out of sympathy for the loss of life that the Italians had suffered.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
You don't hear that on the news,
Yeah.
but it happened. It happened.
Wow.
They were showing sympathy for the loss that the Italians suffered.
That didn't show up in the news, I don't think.
No, it
right?
did not.
No.
Of course, I wouldn't know from what happened here, but I doubt that it did. But there was a massive street march, a quiet march, with Iraqi civilians wearing black armbands for the loss of life that the Italians had suffered. I saw an awful lot of that kind of thing that has not been reported. Now, we were in the Nasiriyah Talil area from about early April 2003 until mid-fall, and then we moved to Baghdad. And
what kind of weather? Now, April to the fall is to us that's real summer here. I mean, that's our summer. Is that their rainy season, or is that in winter?
Okay. Yeah, the rainy season begins, from what I could observe, sometime in November and lasts into March. It's roughly
Okay, so
equivalent to our winter
That's
time.
the winter time there, okay.
During the spring, I remember when we first got there, and there was a day, and this would have been in April, I guess, or it was a day in the 80s or 90s, and we had some Gulf War veterans from Operation Desert Storm
yes.
serving with us. And I made the comment to one of them as I was walking by him. I said, "Well, Sarge," I said, "it sure is a hot one." And he just looked at me and he smiled. He said, "Sir, you ain't seen nothing yet."
Yeah.
The hottest that I can verify from looking at a thermometer was 4 o'clock in the afternoon on one day where it got to be 148.
Mercy.
I read that. I had soldiers who were out in the heat of the day in August, and one of them had a digital thermometer, and he said to me, he and several others read the thermometer to say 160. That's in the direct sun.
That to me would be unbearable.
There's no humidity though.
Oh, but
And that's significant because your body is able to adjust. The main thing, the critical thing that you had to always remember to do, drink whether you're thirsty or not. The first thing I did in the morning after I sat up was I drank a canteen full of water. And I drank throughout the day whether I wanted to drink or not because the perspiration never gathers on your skin, it evaporates.
sure.
So you will not know that you're dehydrating until you're getting to the point when you're thirsty. And the saying was in that situation, if you're thirsty, you're wrong. Meaning you've messed up.
Okay.
So you had to drink. So depending on what a person did, the level of physical activity, I probably drank, in my case, I'm going to guess between 5 and 6 quarts of water a day.
Wow.
I think somebody working in any kind of strenuous activity, whether in a combat situation, somebody in the engineers, but anybody outside working heavily, 8 quarts of water a day, I can easily believe they'd need to consume just in order to keep
To function.
to function, right?
Yeah, wow. So you're in Baghdad now.
Yes.
That's a little different from where you were.
Yes.
Because things in Baghdad were really, the information that we get is that Baghdad is the hot spot of the whole war.
We took most of the fire that we took, other than the Scud attacks in Kuwait, took place in Baghdad.
Yep.
And Baghdad is a large city with many different neighborhoods, and different neighborhoods would have a religious or a political allegiance.
Mm-hmm.
In one area, you might have a neighborhood where there's a strong support for Saddam Hussein. In another neighborhood a few miles away, you would find that the vast majority of the people in that neighborhood would give you the thumbs up and a big smile when you roll down the street, and the children would all come running to you. I had on Christmas Day in 2003, this is just kind of exemplifies what this is like. Christmas Day 2003, I was in Baghdad doing a worship service in the section of the city called Qadamiyah. And in that area, I was doing worship service for some of our soldiers. Because we had soldiers stationed all over the city.
In different neighborhoods.
Yes, different neighborhoods.
Yeah.
We had troops, and so I would go out to visit them.
That, yeah.
And sometimes when another chaplain couldn't get to a place, I would go to some place where he would say, "Can you cover for me? Can you go do a worship service? Spend a couple of days with my people up there?" And I would do that too. So I got to see different places. I wasn't simply stuck in one place. But on Christmas Day in 2003, I was sitting out in the yard, for want of a better term, of this building where we had some of our soldiers working. And there was an Iraqi man who was a bricklayer, and he was working on a construction project nearby. And he was stopping, and he came over, and he sat down next to me. This man didn't know me at all. No. And he patted my arm. And he proceeded to let me know in the best way that he was able to that I was in a safe place, that I had nothing to fear because these people, meaning the people of that neighborhood, were glad to see the Americans be there. In fact, we had situations, the situation of that building was that it was in a sniper's paradise. When I walked in and I looked around and I could see that the building was on 3 sides in a perfect position from short range for a sniper to just start picking people off. It was bad. The first sergeant and I, when we walked in, he just kind of looked at me and said, "Chaplain, I don't like the look of this." I said, "I don't like the look of it either." There was never a single shot. Now this is Baghdad. There was never a single shot fired at the Americans in that place for the whole time that we were there. In fact, people from the neighborhood, if they saw a car or a person that they didn't recognize, they would come and they would say to somebody who was a sentry or a guard, "There is a car down the street. It doesn't belong to anybody who lives here. And there is a pistol on the front seat. Somebody should know about this."
Isn't that something? Yeah.
That kind of thing happened at a frequency that I don't think most people in this country know anything about.
We don't hear about that kind of stuff.
But what surprised me in that neighborhood, now it's Christmas, remember, this is a Christian holiday. When I came in, there was a cake on a table. And one of the military police soldiers pointed at the cake and said, "Chaplain, what do you think of the cake?" I said, "It's beautiful."
Yeah.
And this sergeant said to me, she said, "One of the civilians brought that into us because she knows this is a special day in our faith." The woman who bought that cake was a Muslim.
Sure.
Now, if that isn't a goodwill gesture,
I don't know what is.
I don't know what is.
I agree.
It really gives the lie to this mystique that I think we've developed in this country, that all Muslim people are hate-filled, bigoted, violent folks.
Yeah.
The reverse is true, and I saw that to be the case. I have great respect for the people that I worked with over there, the Iraqi national people that I had the chance to meet. They typified, and I think this really sort of encapsulates the whole scenario. The feedback that I've gotten from a number of sources says that this still continues to be the case. One man stopped me in Baghdad, and he spoke very good English. And of course, I'm in full uniform.
Sure.
What we called full battle rattle was the expression.
Full battle rattle.
Full battle rattle. And he came up to me and he said, very, very good English. And accented, he said, "Sir," and whenever I noticed when the finger would go up, I needed to pay attention. If somebody was going to say something important.
Those are little signals.
That was a signal. When I would see this, I would know it was somebody had something that they felt was very important for me to say.
Okay.
He came up to me, and again, he reached out and he patted my arm. I think these are significant gestures, because this is to say, I am not your enemy. I do not hate you. I mean no harm to you. This man came up to me and he said, "Sir, we do not want you here forever." And I looked at him and I said, "Sir, I am so glad to hear you say that, because I don't want to be here forever." And the two of us laughed.
Yeah.
This Iraqi man and I, we laughed out there on the street. Yeah. And then he turned serious and he looked at me, the finger went up again, and he said, "But you cannot leave now." He said, "If you go now, there will be chaos." And I have heard from various sources, military personnel coming back, including a number, I must say, of all of the coverage that I've seen media-wise, I probably get more of that kind of feedback on NPR than any other broadcast network that I've seen. They're not thrilled that we're there. Who would be thrilled to have an occupying army in their country? Who would? I don't blame them for looking forward to the day that we leave. Not one bit. But even among some of the people who initially did not want us there, there has become a realization that until the government itself is able to stabilize and get strong, our presence does keep, I didn't say a good, but a better stability than if we were absent.
Well,
Shiites and Sunnis agree on that, with a small minority, very small minority. The followers of Muqtada al-Sadr, he's a Shiite cleric. His father was murdered by Saddam Hussein. My opinion is that he is a person who very much wishes to gain political power. I think he would like to be the kingmaker, so to speak, in that country. He's very violently anti-American. He has his own private army, and our people have clashed with the Mahdi army, as it's called, basically starting with the time when we had defeated the Iraqi forces of Saddam's government. They stayed very quiet until Saddam and his forces were out of the way, and then all of a sudden we started hearing about them. I've known about their existence for quite a while before, from what I understand, there was even any mention of them in the U.S. press.
Yeah. These Sunnis and Shiites, and then there's the insurgents, which we don't know who they are, I guess.
Well, we do. There are many different insurgencies.
Yeah, the ones that are using these roadside suicide bombers and all that. That road to the airport seems to be
traveled that road.
That road is dangerous.
Well, I guess what I would say is this: you don't carry on conversation on that road. Every person in that vehicle is watching someplace. You're watching windows, tops of building situations, people passing by. You don't stop your watch until you pull into the place that you mean to go. Yeah. There is no such thing as a leisurely drive, because you are a target. You are the enemy to some people. You have many different insurgencies. You have different local militias that are not only fighting us, but they're fighting with each other for control.
Killing their own people as well.
You've got foreigners. It was always interesting to me when I would hear the Iraqis talk about the foreigners. Most of the foreigners they spoke of weren't us. They were people from all around the world, from Chechnya, Malaysia, I guess. I don't know if there are Malaysians there, but probably shouldn't include the Malaysians. Chechnya, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, many Arab nations or places where there is a large Muslim population, where people have been told this is a holy war. They are coming to fight us on the basis of religious convictions, which, as from what I've understood from talking to Muslims there and here, and I'll tell you an interesting story about a Mujahideen fighter that we had. I'm jumping back to Talil.
Okay.
This was a man, I think he was from Jordan, who had come to fight at Saddam's call, but it was the call to, our brothers and sisters, come and defend your brothers and sisters against the evil Americans. And this man was brought into the camp. I'm jumping back to Talil now, my first location. I remember one of the MPs, the intelligence people, telling me this story, and he was incredulous about it. And he told me this. This man had come to Iraq to fight against the Americans, and he was willing to lay down his life for what he believed was a righteous cause in the service of God.
Sure. When
he arrived in Iraq, now at this time Saddam was still running the show. He came and people said to him, you're a foreigner. What are you doing here? And he said, I've come to fight the Americans. I've come to help you, to liberate you from the Americans. They said, all you're doing right now is you're helping him, meaning Saddam, to stay in power. We don't want that. We don't want you here. Go home. Well, as you can understand, I mean, that shattered his whole understanding of why he was there.
Sure.
Under what circumstances he was taken, I don't know, but he was eventually captured. And he was brought into what was then called the core holding area. And as they drove in on the bus, he made a comment to one of the soldiers, saying, "Is this the place where you are going to kill us?" He was very clear in his mind about the fact that they would be killed. All of them on the bus would be killed by the Americans. He just wanted to know if this was going to be the place where it was going to happen. And the guard said, "Nobody's going to kill you here." He said, "If you try to escape or hurt somebody, we'll shoot you, but we're not planning on killing anybody." And the man was surprised at that. And he got out, he was processed into the camp. He noticed that anyone who needed medical attention received medical help. Food and water were being distributed. The sheltering was tents, it was kind of primitive, but he could see that there were efforts being made. Nobody was being tortured, nobody was being beaten. And he literally became unglued.
Wow.
And the interrogator who was talking to him, and I spoke with the interrogator, this man came to me with this story. He said we were sitting there and all of a sudden he started to cry. And he said, I didn't understand what had caused this. And he looked at this man and he said, "Why are you crying?" And he said, this man started saying in Arabic, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." And he said to him, "Why are you crying? Why are you apologizing to me?" This man proceeded to tell the interrogator that they believed that when they went to fight to liberate Iraq, that the Americans would show themselves to be torturers and rapists and monsters, that he was defending his Muslim brothers and sisters. He said, "I have come here and I have seen that all the things I was told
They're not true.
were not true."
Yeah.
He said, "I am ashamed." Now, from my understanding, I don't see why he should be ashamed. I would say, I know this man would have killed me under different circumstances. I never met him.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, this man, what he'd been told in terms of the messages that were coming to him where he was, what he was being told and what he was seeing were two different things. That was, I walked away from that conversation with that soldier who wrote me a letter a year later telling me that I had brought communion. It was Maundy Thursday, and I had brought communion up to some of the soldiers. He, I guess, was surprised to see a chaplain there, but I mean, they couldn't come to me, so I felt I needed to go to them. But I never forgot that all of a sudden this terrorist, so to speak, saw some things he wasn't expecting to see.
Right.
See, my sense is any time that we as Americans acted out of the standards of the Geneva Convention and our military regulations, and also the ideals we purport to espouse as a country, it has a positive effect.
Yeah.
When we step outside that, then we give fuel to the fires that the enemies are trying to feed.
Right. Let me ask you another question about chaplain. When I was in the service, the chaplain, we'd have a service like once a week, or but if a fellow had a problem, we were always, if you got a problem, something at home or something in the service, no matter what it was, go see the chaplain.
Right.
Is that still going on?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That still continues. I would have many situations where a soldier would directly approach me, and one of the things that I encouraged, and I told my first sergeants and company commanders, see, we were in a headquarters company. We would have other units from other places attached to us depending on the job. So I'd have a whole group of soldiers who were my parishioners, so to speak, but they didn't know me. So I had to all of a sudden make acquaintance with all of the, I mean, the folks in my headquarters company all knew me. They'd known me for several years. Yeah. These people, I was a new phenomenon. And I would always make sure to talk to the first sergeant, company commander, and anytime I could get with platoon or section sergeants, I would say, listen, this is my policy. You have an issue, you have a problem, you have something you need to talk about, you see me, you come talk to me.
Okay.
I said, I'm here for a reason. I said, that's why I'm here. And I made sure, one of the things that was very important, it was one of the things that was stressed very, very firmly when I was in chaplain school is what the Army, anyway, calls ministry of presence. You have got to be where your soldiers are. You have got to be in the places where they are. You cannot stay in one place and wait for them to come to you. You have to go to where they are, if you can physically get there, and be with them. In some cases, my ministry may have been just walking around talking to people. I used to refer to it as loitering with intent. But I would do that. And over time, I would begin to develop a sense of, well, this is a guy we think we can go talk to. We feel comfortable with him. And I had an awful lot of, every situation that you can probably imagine as somebody who served in the Army yourself. All kinds of personal issues. What's going on back home, what's happening here, some of my fears, some of my worries, my disappointments, my anger. I've got a problem with this guy. I don't think the first sergeant likes me. All kinds
everything.
of Excuse me. Everything under the sun. And that was very much a part of my ministry, as well as doing worship services, Bible studies, prayer meetings, and in some cases I would be out. I made it a point at least once a week to be out on the graveyard shift. If I had soldiers who it was a 24-hour day operation. Well, if I didn't go out at night, I was missing half my soldiers because they were asleep during the day. So Fridays was my day basically to not sleep. I would get up Friday morning, I would make my rounds among what I'll call the day troops, the folks who are on the day shift. And then
then the graveyard shift.
Then it's from 7 to 7, 7 at night, 7 in the morning. Now, I wouldn't necessarily be there till 7 in the morning, but I would make sure that I got around to the soldiers who were doing the 7 to 7 shift and visit them and see to their needs. And I don't know what there is. There's something about nighttime. If it's quiet, where all of a sudden people start opening up to you in a way that I don't know why they don't necessarily do in the daytime. So I got to hear an awful lot.
I bet you did. That's interesting. So you were in Baghdad for how long, David?
We were in Baghdad from it was sometime in November, I believe, until March. We were not in Baghdad as long as we were in the Talil Nasiriyah area. The nature of our mission had changed at that point. Among other things, we're still providing road security, in other words, convoy security, patrol-type missions, escorts for civil affairs units. Some of our guys were involved in raids that the civil affairs people needed to be in charge of. More like an arrest, not going in and shooting a place up, but having to go in and get somebody. There was some of that was done. Our soldiers, the joke about the military police is MP stands for multi-purpose. We had some people who were on road security, some people who were working as teachers to try and help build up a responsible Iraqi police force. Trying to say, look, you don't go around beating people over the head. Here's how you need to treat people. We had people whose jobs were to go out and teach police officers how to be police officers as opposed to oppressors. So we had many people serving many different functions. But the main reason that we were in Baghdad was to run the high-value detention facility. It had been in operation there. We took it over from another unit. And I think probably the thing, when we found out about this mission, why we're going to Baghdad, there was silence in the room because we knew what the high-value detention facility was. These were the places where we would see the people who were, and this is our term, were on the deck of cards. And the deck of cards, which you may know about, was that deck of cards that showed pictures of the leaders. Now, the funny thing about the deck of cards is we never got to see one. I got a deck of cards sent to me because one of my parishioners was given one at a Sunoco gas station, and she thought it might be a good idea for me to have it, so she mailed it to me. The government never gave them to us, but I had somebody who got it at a promotional at a gas station in the States send one over to me. But many of the people that were pictured on the deck of cards were people that we were responsible for detaining in that place. I never in my life imagined that I would talk to Tariq Aziz.
He was Saddam's
Number two man.
number 2 man. He was in this country a lot.
Yes, he was. He spoke exceptionally good English.
Yes, he did.
Most of the leadership of Saddam Hussein's government spoke excellent English. Not everyone that we had in the facility did. Not all of them were prominent figures. But I met a number of people that if I were to mention names or nicknames, they would be people that at least the name or the nickname would be known to you.
Mm-hmm.
But I had several brief encounters. I never made a point to approach any of them. I was very clear in what my responsibilities were to them, and I had responsibilities to them. They had legitimate needs, especially that pertained to religious issues. I was a person that they could approach with the presence of a guard, ask for that, and I would see if it was a legitimate request and one that I could respond to. And if I could, I would do it.
You would do it.
I had someone who asked me for devotional material.
Muslims asking you.
Well, not everybody in there was Muslim. Tariq Aziz is a Chaldean Christian. That's his religious background. He's not a Muslim. As a matter of fact, one of the last things, there has been for centuries a large Christian population in a neighborhood in Baghdad. Now, Iraq is predominantly Muslim, but there's about a 5% Christian population in the country.
Were they allowed, do you think, to go to a service and have?
I saw the churches.
So
I would pass by churches in Baghdad, and they were clearly churches. There was a cross on the steeple. I saw those
I wasn't
things.
aware of that. I thought
I had a chance to meet the bishop of the Chaldean church. He came out to speak with us. Now that is a church which looks as its ultimate oversight and authority to the Pope. I guess you could, I don't know a better way to put it, and it's probably not the appropriate way, but it is an affiliate of the Roman Catholic Church. I met this man. I have a photograph someplace of me standing with him. Yeah. Tariq Aziz is from a Chaldean Christian background. And one of the things, it was probably the last time I ever had a chance to speak with him. He saw me. I had a cross on my cap or on my helmet. And they would approach me and ask what the significance of that was, and I would explain to them that I am a Christian clergyman, and that I'm here to provide for the religious needs of my soldiers. I would keep my answers very simple. I didn't want to give them any more information than was appropriate. But this man came to me. I will never forget Tariq Aziz coming to me with great excitement, showing me a Bible that he had just gotten. It was a leather-bound, red-letter edition, which means that all of the words of Jesus are in red print.
Okay.
Bible with maps and all kinds of cross-references in the margins. He'd never seen anything like this. And he was excited. I mean, he was genuinely, oh, you must see this, you must see this. I'll get it, I'll bring it for you. And he brought this out. Now, I have a Bible similar to the one he has. But I could see that this was something totally new to him. So he was explaining to me how it worked. These references show you this and that. And the red letters, that means those are the words of Jesus. And he was quite excited with this. It was in English. At one point, I happened to flip to the back, and it's rather interesting. There were maps in the back. It's rather interesting that the map that I inadvertently opened to was a map that showed Ur, which I mentioned to you was near the place where we were first stationed. And in Ur, and we have pictures of that, I know, and well, actually this photograph right here is a picture of me standing on the top of a pagan temple that existed 6,000 years ago and would have been a building that, say, Abraham and Sarah, as children, would have seen. So I opened to the map, and he looked at me, and his eyes sparkled. I mean, these people are very proud of their culture and their history, and they should be. They have every reason to be. And he pointed on the map to Ur. And he looked at me and said, that is the place where Abraham came from. And he said to me, have you ever seen it? And I'm thinking to myself, I better watch how I answer here. I said, I have been there. I have seen it. I have seen the temple. I didn't tell him I was stationed there, but he was very proud of that, and he explained, that the three great faiths, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, all trace back in history ultimately to Abraham as their founding father. He showed me the maps, and he was speaking with great pride about the ancient history of Iraq. And at one point he said to me, he said, in his journeys, St. Paul came here. And I felt very embarrassed, but I had to correct him. And I looked at him and I said, I thought that it was St. Thomas. And he looked at me and he smiled. And there was a twinkle in his eye, and he just, there goes the finger again. He said, the memory is not what it once was. We laughed.
He might have been testing you too.
He could have been.
He could have been, yeah.
He could have been. But I had a couple of very brief exchanges of that sort with him. The other one that I had with Tariq Aziz, which is kind of, how people are trying to make the best out of a bad situation. He came to me. I don't know why he did, because at that particular point he could not have known who I was and what I was by virtue of the fact that none of my insignia was showing. For some reason he came and he spoke to me. And he said, this was during the rainy season when it was cold and it could get down to freezing.
Wow.
He said to me, it is cold at night. And I looked at him, I said, yes, sir, it is. He never told me who he was, by the way. He never said who he was.
He didn't say.
Never once. He would call me sir, and I would call him sir. He said, sir, he said, it is cold at night. I said, yes, sir, it is. And then, as though he wasn't sure I quite understood, he said, the rooms, they never called them cells. I don't know why, but they called them rooms. The rooms are cold. There is no heat. He said, it is cold at night. And I said, yes, sir. I said, I know that there is an awareness of the problem, and they're making steps to fix it. Now, for an instant, he had a look on his face of absolute frustration, sort of like what you would see on the face of somebody who's gone to the building superintendent and been told, yeah, we'll get to it, And when I saw that look of just, ugh, I said to him, I understand, sir. I said the heat does not work in my room either. And he was very surprised. There was a look of genuine surprise on his face. He said, you have no heat. I said, no, the heat is not working in my room either. And then he looked at me, up went the finger again, and he said, it is not good to have the problem, but it is nice to have the company.
Wow, what a way to handle that.
I never imagined.
He didn't ask you for a blankets or anything.
No. He never did that.
No?
But it was interesting to me that, granted, I don't feel sorry for him for where he was. He got there by the choices he made. Mm-hmm. But he was still and is still a human being.
Sure.
And on that, we had some areas where we could connect. And he was not above humor even with me. I never could have imagined in my wildest dreams or nightmares or whatever you would call them that I would have conversations with Tariq Aziz or several of the other people who were in the leadership of Saddam Hussein's government.
David, tell me a little bit about, we've heard a lot about this famous prison in Baghdad.
Abu Ghraib. Abu Ghraib.
Yeah.
I was never there. It was, I don't actually even know quite how far away it was from where I was. There were soldiers who I had previously known that I knew were over there. Abu Ghraib, of course, and the incidents that took place there happened, at the time when I was there. I had heard from another soldier who came up to me and said to me, "Chaplain, have you heard what's happened?" They called it Abu for short.
Abu, okay.
He said, "Chaplain, have you heard what's happened at Abu?" And I said, "What?" He said, "Some MPs over there took snapshots of naked prisoners." Yeah. I blew my stack. I totally lost my temper. I was furious. The MPs with whom I worked, and I sat in on the classes that they taught among themselves. We had state police officers, local police officers, we had corrections officers working in our unit, and they drummed into our soldiers again and again and again. We have to abide by the Geneva Convention, U.S. Army military regulation on the laws of war, and they went into excruciating detail about what was appropriate and inappropriate. I never saw, and I never heard of, and because of the relationship I had with my soldiers, I'm convinced that if there had been abuse by any of my soldiers, I would have heard about it because somebody would have come to me. I'm convinced of that. Mm-hmm. There was never a single incident of abuse. The reason was our soldiers knew how to conduct themselves. Abu Ghraib was a dreadful breach of everything that we were taught and that we stood for. And I remember saying to the sergeant who told me that, I said, they might as well be in the pay of the enemy. I said, this is a dreadful propaganda victory for the enemy. Everything that they are saying about us is now proved true because of what 4 or 5 individuals have done.
I know it.
But I'm going to interrupt you here.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you something else. This is something that I spring on people. There's another story about Abu Ghraib that a lot of people don't know, and it's never been publicized. I know about it, and I want to tell this. And I want to tell this especially, this is part of the reason I'm here is I want people to know that there's more about what's happening there than just what's seen on the news.
Okay.
Abu Ghraib, the prison story, everybody knows about. This next story is one that whenever I tell it, nobody seems to have heard it before. Abu Ghraib, there is a prison with that name, and near it is a town of that name. The vast majority of the people in the town of Abu Ghraib were very staunch supporters of Saddam Hussein. When our Army and Marine Corps troops moved into that city, there were a lot of shaken fists, rocks and stones were thrown. I'm sure that there was probably gunfire. I just never heard about that. I know that some of the missiles that were launched at us from time to time were launched from that neighborhood because it was a supportive neighborhood. But there's a story about Abu Ghraib that I hear very little mention of, and it's a shame because it needs to be told. Our Army and Marine forces went into that town, and they were treated with suspicion and hostility at first. We were the enemy. These were people who were very much supportive of Saddam Hussein. Mm-hmm. What our soldiers did in that town was they noticed that the elementary schools in Abu Ghraib, after Saddam's fall, looters had come in and stripped anything usable, electrical wiring, roofing, woodwork of any sort, doors, chairs, furniture. It was all gone. It was stripped down to the brick.
Peeled it all away.
Peeled it away. Yeah. Gone. Our soldiers went in and started rebuilding the schools, started to refurnish them, started to get educational materials. One of the things that my unit did a lot of, we went to daycare centers, villages, schools, hospitals. We brought medical supplies, educational supplies, toys. I'm jumping back and forth, I realize. They rebuilt the schools in Abu Ghraib. The Americans, the Army and the Marines did the job. And I have seen the pictures of Iraqi civilians and U.S. military personnel standing outside the door of the school with children in place as the Iraqi flag is being raised on the flagpole for the start of the new school year. One of the sergeants who participated in that shared the fact that where they once had thrown at them stones or dirt clods or had shaken fists, now people waved and shook hands.
Isn't that a story? Right.
Nobody's ever heard that before. That's the other Abu Ghraib story. of things that we did on a positive nature. A funny story to tell. I remember going out and helping to distribute clothing and school supplies in a village in Baghdad, just outside. It's kind of on the outskirts of the city. We drove up in 2.5-ton trucks loaded with all kinds of things from back home. Pads of paper, pens, pencils, erasers, things like that. Just very basic
kids need to go to school.
That's right.
Yeah.
Bic pens, all of that stuff. For the little children of the village, and I don't know where they all came from. My church people sent stuff to me once I told them about this. So I had children's clothing, I had toys. One of the things that the little children especially loved were stuffed animals.
Oh.
So we were handing out these teddy bears and little figures like this. I remember specifically one little girl hiding sort of behind her mother's skirts and looking. She was 3, if that. At one of the sergeants, our sergeant she had in her hand a teddy bear, and she was down. She's, "Come on, this is for you. This is for you." And of course, the little girl doesn't speak English.
She wasn't so sure, no.
But the mother could see. And she would, just kind of give her a little push.
Yeah.
And finally the little girl came over, very, very timid, and took the bear, looked at it, clutched it, turned, and ran back. And the mother said, "Shukran, shukran," that's thank you.
Yeah.
And the little girl had forgotten to say thank you. And the mother was saying, you say thank you for this. So the little girl turned, looked at the sergeant, and said, "Shukran," and hid. Now we laughed about that.
Great story, yeah.
I will tell one more that's humorous.
Okay.
A little boy came up to me. I don't know why he came up to me. Again, there was nothing about what I was wearing that could have told him anything about the fact that I was an American soldier. But I found that there were times, I don't understand why, that Iraqis, when I was in with other American soldiers, for some reason Iraqis would come and talk to me. I still can't figure out why me as opposed to somebody else. Anyway, this little boy came up to me. He pointed at the truck. And to him, this truck was like a cornucopia. It was like the bottomless pit of everything good. It was almost like a magic thing. He was probably about 8 or 9. And he looked at me with just the most pathetic eyes. And he said, Mister. And he'd point at the truck. He'd say, "Football." Now, he didn't mean an American football, but a soccer ball.
Soccer ball, yeah.
"Football, mister." Football? I mean, he knew just a few American words. And this kid was breaking my heart. He was looking so pathetic. And, "Kid, you're killing me here. What are you doing?" And "Mister, football? Football?" And I said, "La," which means no. La, football.
No football.
He looked at me, yes, no football. He looked at me and said, "No?" Now, he wouldn't take no for an answer initially, like any other child. Wouldn't take no for an answer initially. He was going to see if he could wear me down, because he knew there had to be a soccer ball in that truck someplace. Had to be, because everything else was in there.
Yeah.
And I tried to make him know that I felt badly, my facial expression, I felt sorry, but that I had no football. And he looked at me and he said, "La." I said, "La, no. No football, mister." I said, "No football." And he turned around, walked away, and said very loudly, "Oh, shucks!" But shucks was not the word he used.
No.
It's the one that I cannot repeat.
I know. I understand.
I just about fell over on the ground laughing. I said, "Well, he knows some English, all right." He picked up some of the bad words. But part of the reason why I tell that is, I think it's important. It's part of the reason why I tell these stories, and part of the reason I'm here today. Soldiers from my unit, one guy got to go home for Christmas in 2003. He came back. We were talking about what was going on in Iraq. And I asked him the question, what are they saying about us back home? What's on the news? And his head went down, and he said, "Chaplain, it's a disaster. It's all a disaster. They hate us. We hate them. It's a mess. We're destroying the place. We all sat back in our seats, speechless. And the soldiers in that room, that group of soldiers that I was sitting with, said, "We can't let this be the case. When we get home, we've got to tell what we've seen. We've got to tell them what we know. People have got to find out about the other things that are happening over here." Part of the reason that I'm here telling these stories is I understand, and I don't treat the media as having a bias. I don't accept that. What I do accept is a very simple fact that runs the media in this country. Newspapers, magazines, television, and radio need advertising. And in order to get advertising, people have got to want to see and read what's there. Mm-hmm. So if the bank gets robbed, the newspapers will go there, the TV and radio will go there and talk to the teller and the people who worked in the bank.
Absolutely.
If the bank does not get robbed, if no one gets shot, if it's quiet, it's 38 years and the bank's never been robbed. If you put "bank never robbed" in big block letters on the cover of the newspaper, nobody's going to buy it.
No.
So really, no news is good news. And that's really the bottom line. The difficulty is, right now, the only news that people are getting back here in the States is the bad news. You don't hear about the good news. And as I talk to other veterans who've come back, and I hear third-person accounts,
and they agree with you.
Basically what I'm hearing, even up to recent returning veterans, I'm hearing the same thing. I'm hearing the same kinds of things that I saw and experienced while I was there. I'm hearing other veterans say to me, "Hey, those are good people. You treat them with respect, you treat them fairly, and they'll do anything they can for you. Those are good people over there." There's a separation between the kind of hell that the infantry and the street patrol MPs may have in certain areas of certain cities. There is combat, there is bloodshed, there is treachery. All of those things are true. They are real events, they really do happen. But the ironic and the tragic thing about is the story that's not being told. Most of the stories we hear on the news, not all of them, but most of them, take place either stuff from the city of Baghdad.
That's true.
Or areas in Anbar province, which the Iraqis refer to as the Wild West. That's the phrase they used with us to describe Anbar. There are 18 provinces. Why aren't we hearing about the good and the positive that's happening in Baghdad, in Fallujah, in other places all throughout that country? Because they're not terribly exciting. There's no shock. There's no awe. Building an elementary school and bringing books and pens and pencils is, I mean, let's face it, when people want to hear war stories, they want to hear about courage under fire. And I'm not belittling those who have shown courage under fire. I honor them. I hold them in great respect. But there is another aspect of what we're doing over there that does not get mentioned. Because quite frankly, if you're looking for shock and awe, these are the things that are boring. But they are vital to living up to the words that Iraqi Air Force general said. You Americans will win this war, not because you are the most powerful nation on earth, but because you win the hearts and minds of the people. When we live up to that, then we will stand for what the country stands for. And when we don't, as far as I'm concerned, we desecrate this flag and everything that it stands for.
David, what a great way to end this interview. I think that was great. Your stories and your situation over there is giving me a different perspective, I'll tell you, on the whole thing.
Good.
Because I listen to TV and I read the newspapers and I see what's going on and I say, when can we leave there? When is this going to be over? And
let us get the job done first.
That's what the president says. Let's get the job done first.
I want to say I'm not an apologist for the President of the United States government. I'm only speaking about what I have seen and experienced and what I have heard from others from that time and since that time who have come back and told me were doing an awful lot of good over there. That was what I saw. Anyone who had contact with Iraqi people and worked with them closely, the relationships and the bonds that took place can have a positive effect. And if we operate on that basis, we can make a difference there.
Well, I hope you're right, and I
hope
I
I'm right,
hope it
too.
works out.
Me too.
Because there's been a lot of fellows that are over there and didn't come back, and
Yes.
there's a lot of them that are back here that
Yes.
are minus limbs. And
I've stood over their graves over there.
I bet you have.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
No,
It's not easy. Well, David, you brought some pictures with you.
Yes, I have some.
And if you would just, maybe you could...
This one here?
Yeah, start with this one right
Okay.
here. This
is a picture of me, dressed a little bit differently than I am now. I am standing on the top of an ancient pagan Iraqi temple in the ancient, and when I say ancient, I mean 6,000 years.
6,000 years.
The city of Ur. This is the very top of the temple, which was excavated, I believe, initially in the late 1800s and was excavated on and off up until maybe the mid 1930s. It's a temple to a pagan god, the sun god, that they worshipped. It is in the town, the city, that Abraham and Sarah grew up in as children. This is a building that they would have seen. I was stationed not too far from there. In fact, and I don't know, it's really not easy to see this because of the size of the buildings. There's just enough distance you can't quite see the buildings in which we were staying at that point. But this is taken from the city of Ur in south central Iraq. It was overpowering experience to stand on a place about which I could read in the Bible.
I can imagine.
It was
I can
overpowering
imagine. Yeah, unreal.
to read about it.
Yeah.
I had the chance to see the ancient city of Babylon too while I was there,
Wow.
and that was quite an amazing thing. Yeah, I have some other pictures that are over here on the table.
Yeah. David brought some pictures with us today, and he's going to describe and talk about each one of them.
Some of these photographs that I have give a little bit of an idea of aspects of the mission that we were involved with, and also some of the conditions, some of the people that we had a chance to meet. Now, these pictures are all taken when I was down in the Talil Nasiriyah area. I don't happen to have with me today any of the pictures that were taken of some of what we were doing in Baghdad. But I think these give a good understanding of the nature of what we did. This picture here I'm especially proud of for a little detail that's almost probably not even going to be easy for people to see. These are three boys standing outside of one of the hospitals in the city of Nasiriyah. Now, in this little boy, the little boy with the bandage on his nose, this little boy is holding right down here a piece of bread. Now, that probably doesn't look terribly significant. Right where this pointer's at, you can just probably barely see this little piece of bread. My unit had something to do with the fact that little boy has that. One of the things I'm very proud of, I wasn't involved in it. I didn't take any actual effort in making this happen other than being part of the delivery mission. One of the things that my unit did was worked with a non-governmental organization called War Child. And they set up a bakery in the city of Nasiriyah to provide bread for the schools, hospitals, child care centers, and different places where there were children in the city.
Oh, that's so
I was very proud of the fact. I had a chance, I have pictures of the bakery operation, and was very proud to find out that my unit had a part in making it happen. But what that little boy is eating right there is something that was made in a bakery by a non-governmental organization that was working with my battalion. So I feel like, so to speak, I have a piece of that bread.
okay.
And I'm very, that's the nature of some things that, like I say, are not terribly dramatic, but they're important. They have a small part to play in the building of a nation. This is these physicians, these two gentlemen in the center are doctors. I don't remember who this individual was. He was not someone with my specific unit. I don't remember his name right offhand. That obviously is me right there. we brought supplies. I think I mentioned during our talk, Jack, about
Yes.
us delivering supplies to the Children's Hospital in Nasiriyah. These are the two doctors. I mentioned the one doctor who would, after we made that first delivery, we made more than one, referred to me as his friend. These are the two physicians. These two men have an incredible amount of courage, working in a very, especially at that point in time, a very difficult situation with very little in the way of supplies or medicine. I was very proud of the fact that my unit was able to help see that these supplies were delivered to that hospital. I was a very moving experience going through that hospital and seeing the desperate need of families and children in there, and just I had great admiration for the courage of these two men who were really undertaking the care of so many desperately needy people with so little in the way of resources. Those two men really had my admiration and respect. This picture over here is a picture of what once was an Iraqi Air Force barracks. Although there was not a lot of battle damage sustained to these buildings, they were not in good shape. There was no electricity, there was no running water. We had plenty of heat, but that was being generated by the sun, of course. We could have used a little air conditioning. Would have been very nice to have had. A lot of our soldiers very much would have wished they could have had glass in the windows. These buildings, when we got them, were surrounded by trash and garbage. We worked very hard to clean them up and make them usable. We had generators which at a later time we were able to fire up and have a minimum amount of electric light working in these structures. But you know, when Army personnel, when soldiers move into an area, they're going to do everything they possibly can to improve on the situation, and we did. This was typical of the buildings that we stayed in. As the base around us, as more military personnel came in, behind these buildings, tent cities were set up. There were tent cities up and down the road. But because we were among the first units to get in there, we still had access to these hard structures, and so we moved in and lived in those.
Sure.
We were talking about dead Americans. This looks to be just a picture of a soccer field. It was near the General Hospital in downtown Nasiriyah. 11 United States military personnel who were prisoners of the Iraqis were tortured and murdered and buried in this field. Jessica Lynch, who everybody has heard about, was one of the military personnel who, because for whatever reason, maybe because of her injuries, she was not tortured and killed. She survived, but the others who were there with her were not so lucky. In fact, we at one point had in custody the commander of the death squad.
Is that right? Yeah.
Who executed these troops. And I watched our medics go and treat this man when he suffered what we were later told was an anxiety attack. They went over, they pulled him out of the sun, they treated him, they gave him medical care, and I thought to myself, this is the man who tortured and killed our troops, and we are treating him with the kind of care that we would have wished they had been treated with. And I've often wondered if he ever recognized the difference in what we had done. But in this field there were 11 shallow graves. The bodies were eventually exhumed and sent back to the States. But I stood over those graves. Wow. It was a very emotional experience for me, realizing that just a short time before Americans were murdered there. A Shiite cleric who I met, an Ayatollah, it's like an archbishop, made the point. I met with him, and he said to me, very, very deep, sincere, and seriousness in his voice, these soldiers did not die in battle, he said. They were murdered. Yeah. And he said, there is no place in Islam for what happened to them. Those who did this are not Muslims. In effect, what he was saying, it was almost as if he was excommunicating, to use a Christian term, these individuals. He did not consider them to be Muslims by what they did.
Wow.
It was impressive for me to hear that kind of thing said by religious leadership and practicing Muslim lay people in the time that I was over there. I often heard things like that, and this again does not get mentioned very much. This, when we stopped eating MREs, and I think maybe what I could probably do is just move this down here so you can get a better view of this photograph. For the initial time after we had arrived in the Talil Nasiriyah area, we ate MREs 3 times a day. And then we got the luxury of having what was called an MKT, a mobile kitchen trailer set up, where they were able to, basically what they had, it was kind of like a frozen TV dinner. They just stuck the food over boiling water and served it to us.
It was hot.
It was hot, yes it was. It was hot, but we had heaters for our MREs. Unfortunately, and I'm not blaming the cooks for this, because when the cooks were given a chance to work with real food, they put on a great feed for us. Yeah. But most of the stuff that we got, we tended, for some reason, we tended getting the same thing over and over and over and over again. And you know, after you've eaten a certain thing for days and days and days on end, you get a little sick of seeing
absolutely.
it. But this was our dining facility. This tent was where we ate. And sometimes what would happen is we get a bad sandstorm. I don't know if you can see the sandbags along here.
Oh yeah, I can.
We get a bad sandstorm, and what would happen is the wind velocity would be so much that it would actually take these tents. My chapel tent, which I don't have a picture of, got flipped around, and I've seen other tents that were actually ripped up and thrown over. But this was the nature of, you know, I mean, we weren't in real rough situation, but things were pretty simple, to put it mildly. This picture over here I took, there's no way that most Americans would be able to know this, but there's a little sign on the top of this door that indicates this building was a mosque. Inadvertently, without knowing what was going on, because some of the construction personnel were building a dirt barrier, and without knowing the significance of this building, they built this. You can see this dirt wall. Well, it would have gone right in front of the door. Well, one of the Muslim soldiers, one of the American soldiers that was working with me, said, "Chaplain, do you know what that building is?" And I said, "No." I said, "What is it?" He said, "That's a mosque." I said, "We've got a problem on our hands then." I said, "Any Iraqi civilian seeing the door of a mosque buried under dirt is going to take that as a clear signal from us of our total disrespect for their culture and their faith." I said, "I have got to tell the commander and I've got to tell the engineers that above all things we have got to uncover that building." I said, "Whether it gets used or not is not my say, but I said it's got to be clear to the people who will be in the area where we are that we do not hold that kind of disrespect." So on Good Friday of 2003, I spent Good Friday with a sergeant in our unit after the backhoe did most of the real heavy work of sweeping, shoveling, and cleaning out this mosque. And I remember at the end of the day I kind of laughed. I said, I never would have imagined that I'd spend Good Friday working inside a mosque in Iraq to help clean it up. But we did that, and I felt very good about the fact that our soldiers did that in effect to basically not send the wrong message to the Iraqi people. This photograph here is simply a picture of me that someone took coming down the steps from the very top of that temple. If you look at the construction, it's amazing that the building has endured the test of time the way that it has. You can still see the brickwork here. I'm coming down the steps from having been to the top. That's that first picture I showed of myself. And that's me coming down the steps. But what a thrill for me to be walking on ground that Abraham and Sarah had been on. Okay. Now this picture here is called, I don't know if it really was or not, but is referred to as Abraham's house. not far from this place right here, there was a town, a village, a city that was discovered. And there was a great deal of digging that was done to unbury these structures. Now, what will look like, just sort of openings here, the roof would have been in place over this. These are all different rooms of a very large house.
Okay.
And one of the things that was really quite exciting was for us, we were able to walk along the walls, basically, of this building and look down and see the rooms and the kinds of things that people would have had, the way they would have lived back 5,000 years ago. It was quite a remarkable experience to see that. As I mentioned to you also, I had, and I don't have those with me, I wish I had, pictures from the ancient city of Babylon, and we've all heard the story of the handwriting on the wall. Well, I stood in the room where that handwriting took place, and that was quite an overpowering experience for me, where Belshazzar, the king, had that unwelcome vision of God, saying, "You have been weighed in the balance and found wanting." That's the phrase that hand wrote upon on the wall. I'm really grateful and very pleased to have the opportunity to share these pictures, Jack, and also have the opportunity to tell the story of my experience over there. I hope other people have a chance to hear this and gain a better understanding of what our mission and our work is.
David, I really appreciate you coming all the way from Pennsylvania to tell this story, which was so interesting to us to have you tell this story. And I want to thank you for being
my
here
pleasure, sir.
And for the service that you've given to your country.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, and thank you for the service to your country that you afforded as well.
Thank you.